biggest protest company in the country. We're best known for allowing people to organize demonstrations, even with 24 hours notice, featuring compensated activists. Every movement from gay rights to civil rights to Tea Party, MAGA, BLM. I mean, these movements have tens of millions, hundreds of millions. So what we do is we're not manipulating support. We're actually saying, hey, people with responsibilities, here's compensation to turn out in favor of something that you already support. You can't buy the gold medal directly, but you can certainly pay for a lot of things that make the gold medal far more likely. So I always use this example of like how many people at Woodstock were protesting Vietnam, how many people at Woodstock just wanted to get laid and smoke pot, right? Like, so they were interpreted as, oh, there's this groundswell. These people are talking about Vietnam. Well, a lot of these people were really there to get laid and smoke weed. I wouldn't take on let's just say the Ku Klux Klan wanted to hire us, right? I wouldn't take that on because I morally disagree with them. The causes I like to take on are generally kind of common sense causes where there's some whack job lefty or some whack job right wing policy that needs to be reined in. I would like to broadly move toward a system that has reduced influence of money on politics. I 100% agree that we should reduce money in politics. And I guess the one thing I would say is I'm happy to organize protesters around that.
Concepts with Sean Watley.
I just had a fantastic conversation with Adam Swart, CEO of Crowds on Demand, and I would call it a friendly debate. He worked hard to convince me why I should support paid protesters, and I kept asking him or pushing back and saying, yeah, I hear you, but I don't quite think I agree. And so his arguments were very strong, actually. He said there's an opportunity cost for anyone who goes to a protest. Often the people who have children that they're taking care of or they've got a job that they have to be at, they're the ones who can't take time off work to go to a protest. Whereas if he comes along with his company and pays those people, then they can now afford to pay for childcare and show up to a protest and demonstrate their support. Again, he emphasized peaceful protests. He doesn't support violent protests, doesn't support burning cars. And he also said there are some ideological issues that he wouldn't support. But he made a strong case. He said, you know, people pay for advertisements, people get paid to be in parliament, people in political office are judged by how much money they bring back for their own constituents. And so he said, you're living in a dream world if you don't realize that there's money flowing all over the place. So why shouldn't we be able to pay protesters? And so I granted him that fact. He did call out my hypocrisy. Adam's been arguing this for the last 13 years. He's been in business and doing quite well by the sound of it. And so he was able to run circles around me. At the end of it all, I leave the discussion with a sense that we actually have much bigger problems in our Western parliamentary democracy when people don't know what's going on. We have very little civics education. We don't have the moral character or fiber to say, no, I'm not going to be bought off in any sense. I'm not going to be bought off as a lobbyist. I'm not going to be bought off by advertising. We're not going to allow the rich and wealthy to buy media companies and determine what sort of content we listen to. If we've lost that whole fabric, and who's to say we ever even had that fabric, then our form of Western parliamentary democracy can't function. And maybe that's where we're at. And Adam's just saying, listen, you need to wake up. This is what's happening. You're living in a dream world. There's money flowing all over the place. Why shouldn't there be money flowing to paid protests? Anyways, it gave me a lot to think about. I still don't agree with the concept of paying for protesters. Just something about it just doesn't sit right with me. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I found it challenging, and paid protesting is a reality in our world, and it's something we need to grapple with. Thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to have Adam Swart with us today. He is CEO of Crowds on Demand. It's a California-based company that focuses on public relations, but really Adam's going to tell us more about it. Adam, welcome.
Sure, Sean, pleasure to be with you on your program. A little bit about Crowds on Demand. We're the largest protest company in the country. We were founded in 2012, so we've been in operation about 13 years. We're best known for allowing people to organize demonstrations, even with 24 hours notice, featuring compensated activists. But one of the other things we do is PR stunts to promote companies, basically anything to create the right context to get your message out, whether it's a company message, whether it's a political message, advocacy message. That's what we do. And that's what we've been doing for 13 years.
Brilliant. So you have a background in political theory, political science, I believe.
Correct.
And so you know about participatory democracy and all these things. Don't you feel a twinge of guilt at potentially upsetting the natural operation of representative democracy?
And how would that be?
Well, it seems like the people that you put in the crowd don't necessarily understand the issues. They're not there of their own volition. They're there because they're being paid to be there. So it seems like you're
See, that's a bit of a
cheating.
misconception about the business. So it's
Okay.
interesting. So a lot of people are asking, like, hey, they have this false perception that what we do is sort of this secretive business, and
Yeah.
therefore people ask, Adam, why are you out there on the show, on the media, right?
Right.
And I think, well, actually, number one, it's not a secretive business. So there's two reasons that I'm on this show or on any show that I do, and I
Right.
like to preface it when I have the time to do it, like on your program. Number one, to 100% disassociate Crowds on Demand from any kind of violent or illegal forms of protest. We don't do that. Even if I had no moral qualms about it, it wouldn't behoove me as a business person to take on those types of engagements. So when you see roads being blocked without a permit, when you see, you know, things getting set on fire, violence, that's not us, right? It doesn't even behoove me to do it, even if I wanted to do it, right? So number one, that. Number two, to kind of address this point that you mentioned, that there's something kind of manipulative about what we do, when and the idea that people are not informed in our crowd, when in fact actually people are informed, and we're just essentially paying people to turn out to support the opinions they already support. So think about it this way: when Rachel Maddow goes on MSNBC, or Tucker Carlson goes on his YouTube program, right? I wager that there's some idea that they're speaking their true views, right? And they're being compensated. I think they both make like 8 figures, right? So I mean, they're making a ton of money, but I'm assuming that they're compensated for their time in expressing their views, not for having their views, right? So I kind of find it a little bit interesting when people are like, oh, well, these paid protesters are don't care about the thing because they're getting a few $100s, when somehow Rachel and Tucker, who make tens of millions of dollars, oh, those guys are somehow genuine. It's like, it's very interesting. So I don't necessarily even buy into the sort of premise of that discussion.
So I'll push you back. I'll push back a teensy bit on this. So let's say I'm okay with you getting paid to organize the protest,
Uh-huh.
but the actual people on the street protesting, I mean, they're there to give me as a viewer the impression that, oh, this is a really important issue, when maybe it's not as important as I may have thought otherwise if that crowd wasn't there.
I think a protest is there to get attention for an issue. So, like, let me give you a couple examples. A protest is there to serve as a catalyst for action, right? Ultimately, if the cause is not good, the cause won't fly. It's like a bird. You can make a bird fly. You can send a bird off, but if the bird does not have wings, the bird will not fly. I mean, I don't go glidering, but if you can push a glider off a cliff, but if the glider has no wings, the glider will crash, right? So the same goes for protest movements. So think about it this way. Like, I'll give you two examples. Tea Party. right? Tea Party was completely bought and paid for by the Koch brothers and other conservative billionaires, right? So the original Tea Party rallies were like a few people in those kind of colonial era costumes, right? Being like, we don't like taxes, we don't like Obama, right? Okay, great. Well, that got magnified because they had a ton of money. That got mega magnified on Fox News and conservative media, but it grew, right? Because ultimately what they were talking about resonated. So the protests and the Fox News and the PR, that was the catalyst. If there hadn't been any money, it would have never even gotten started. But then it took off and really blew up. So conversely, I'll give you another example. So that was a movement that had wings. Here's a movement that didn't have wings, the Jeb Bush presidential campaign, right? I'm pretty sure he spent, and I apologize, Jeb, if I'm getting the figures wrong, but I think it was like $150 million, right? And they got like 2%. I mean, so the point is, and they did everything possible to kind of pay for play, right? So the point is, what the protests do and this kind of action does is it makes sure that people see what you're doing. If ultimately the message doesn't resonate, then it is not going to fly. So what we do is as a catalyst, not as anyone who thinks the number of protesters who show up someplace is some sort of perfect barometer of how the country thinks is a complete fool.
So clearly you've been asked these questions many times before. So essentially you're saying we're living in a dream world if we think that these large protests aren't being funded in some way.
Every movement from gay rights to civil rights to Tea Party, MAGA, BLM. I mean, these movements have tens of millions, hundreds of millions, I mean, billions, perhaps, when you adjust it for inflation. So yeah, I mean, of course, this is the United States of America. It's a capitalist country. I mean, why won't there be money in things? I mean,
Right.
of course there is. I mean, and so rather than being like, oh my God, that's so horrible, or what the other kind of BS that people do is like the left is like, oh my God, these are right-wing astroturfers, or the right is like left-wing paid agitators. Look, let's just all stipulate that there's money in advocacy. And let's just understand that what money can do, like, again, here's another great example. You can buy a Super Bowl ad spot, right? Like, I'm pretty sure the going rate is like $7 million for a 30-second ad in the Super Bowl. Like, there are some of them that go viral where that $7 million turns into billions of dollars of revenue for the company. And there are some where the $7 million is just a complete and total waste of money. So that's how I look at these sort of advocacy movements, is through that same context.
Yeah.
So rather than thinking of it as a perfect barometer, I was going to use it as a poll. If you think of this idea of the protests of like, okay, well, 100 people turned out in favor of this issue and only 25 turned out against it. Well, it must mean that 4 out of 5 people support the issue. I mean, I agree that there's some idiot people who might think that way, but they completely do not know how protests work. And that in many cases, Sean, what we do is we're there to illustrate the point of the silent majority. So think about an issue that might be an 80-20 issue, but the 20 are the ones who are really loud, right? And I'm sure all your listeners or whatever, can think of examples of this where it's like 80% want this, but 20% are really loud. Well, the 20%, might be kind of mouth breather fools who kind of want to show up and go to every single, let's just say, city council meeting, county board meeting, whatever, right? They have nothing better to do, right? They're hippies with a trust fund or whatever. So, okay, we represent the other 80% that might have jobs, that might have kids, that might have responsibilities. Well, that those people don't have time to go show up to every single freaking meeting. So what we do is we're not manipulating support. We're actually saying, hey, people with responsibilities, here's compensation to turn out in favor of something that you already support.
I don't think I could push back at that argument, right? The opportunity cost for some people that have a job to go to a protest, that they're just never going to make that jump. Whereas, to your point, some people can go even for free. It's entertainment for them, and that's not fair.
Right.
Go
And
ahead.
also, certain groups of people are more advantaged than other groups in that, right? So, I mean, it was kind of a joke saying hippies with a trust fund, although I do think that's a lot of the people who go to a lot of these things. But also, I mean, if you're a tech flex worker, like a high income worker, you might actually have more opportunity to turn out to a protest because, hey, you work based on when you have meetings scheduled, but you're not expected to be in an office 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever, right? Whereas certain other people might have responsibilities, particularly working class people might have hourly jobs, right? So that those people, time is money, and they have hourly jobs and childcare responsibilities. So even if they're vociferously in support of something, they simply just don't have the time. But what gives them the time is if we can say, okay, well, you can take off unpaid time from work because we're compensating you for that time.
Yeah. So is this just an American phenomenon, or do you think it's going on around the world?
Well, I mean, for sure, it's going on in some form around the world. I mean, it's a very natural business. The idea that hey, you want to turn people out, it's not the form of this that I practice is a very specific form. So we're very focused on being a catalyst, not being manipulative, being turning out people who support a cause to catalyze further action and further change, right? Whereas, I mean, in India, for example, it's fairly common where you kind of turn out people in the villages to support something or not. I mean, like in a lot of third world countries, people even pay for votes. So those are obviously not things that we associate with, but the idea of sort of some degree of money paying for people to advocate for something is not exactly like some novel phenomenon. I mean, I'd love to be like, I'm this great genius who thought of something that no one else thought of, but I really didn't.
Yeah. So again, you're making good arguments, and it leads me to wonder. There's also a robust argument, and you'd know this from your political science days, of protecting some things against becoming commoditized. So, for example, you shouldn't be able to buy a Nobel Prize. You shouldn't be able. Buying friendship just seems to undermine the whole concept of friendship, and so
Yeah,
we
no, a
are.
lot of people, well, but wait. Can we rewind on that
Yeah, go
part?
ahead.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people on the Upper East Side in New York are going to take big objection with that. So you're saying you can't be friends with somebody because you just want to get invited on their yacht? I mean, what do you like? I mean, as a libertarian, that's kind of an absurd argument to say, well, we all have to be our friendships have to be genuine. Who determines the genuineness of our friendships? You? I mean, it's kind of
Well,
like
would you say there's a difference? So good point again. So I agree. You can't. There's no measuring stick for genuineness in a friendship.
yes.
However, transferring money back and forth to pay for a friend seems like that would be a bad idea. Or paying for a Nobel Prize. Take the Nobel Prize example. Should that be commoditized?
Well, it is commoditized. I mean, in the sense of if you're a world leader, a powerful kind of a jackass of a world leader, and then you suddenly have some commitment to peace, right? I mean, I think there's a very fair argument of like, wait, how does Yasser Arafat, who's not a non-violent dude, get a Nobel Peace Prize? Well, he made peace, but it's like, well, he also made a lot of violence before he made peace. I
But
mean,
he didn't specifically purchase the prize though. So should Adam Swart be allowed to buy a gold medal at the Olympics?
well, I think that you're conflating two things. It's a gradation, right? Adam Swart cannot buy a gold medal at the Olympics in order to win to get the medal at the Olympics. I have to win a competition. However, I could pay. Let's just say I had unlimited money. I could identify the Olympic sport where I might have the best chance to win a gold medal, and subsequently hire the best trainers to make myself a competitive player for those gold medals, as people do, by the way. I mean, there are a lot of parents that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on training maybe more and travel for their kids to hopefully someday compete at the Olympics. So and other parents don't have that ability, right? So yeah, I mean you can't buy the gold medal directly, but you can certainly pay for a lot of things that make the gold medal far more likely. I mean, how many okay, here's another question, Sean. How many professional golfers have rich parents?
Yeah, yeah. So Adam, you're running circles around me. You've spent a decade and a half thinking through these arguments, and it's brilliant. I'm loving it. Uh, Having said that, I think I won a tiny little foothold here in having you
Okay.
admit that some things shouldn't be commoditized. Would you say the gold medal at the Olympic itself, just the gold medal, not the training and the coaches, but the gold medal itself, you can't actually go out and buy that?
Just
I
said for nothing? No, I mean, I don't think you can. But okay, I'm going to push back again. I mean, I'm really kind of getting into the weeds here. But okay, I am China, and I decide I'm going to spend a ton of money, and I think they have on certain sports, right? So Adam Swart, cannot purchase a gold medal for myself having done nothing. But me, the leader of China, not that I am, very far from it, but if I was the leader of China, I could say China is going to invest billions in winning gold medals, and I'm going to have the best training facilities and do things that other countries simply, other than maybe the United States or whatever, can simply not afford to do, and therefore practically guarantee myself gold medals. Now, I don't want to get into the weeds on that with you, because I know what you're trying to say, which is that there's a certain sanctity in certain things.
Right,
Uh,
right.
so I know where that argument is going. You're trying to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
certain sanctity in certain things,
Well,
and
well, not sanctity. I would just say some things we shouldn't commoditize,
I
and I
don't
try.
disagree with that. But
Right,
I'm saying is that things are commoditized more than you realize. So
right.
to go back to protesting, right? So if you're saying, well, people shouldn't be paid to express their opinions, right? Well, what about like what I'm saying is, number one, let's talk about incentives, right? So what I
Right.
call what we do is incentivize activism, and I know that sounds like sort of BS corporate speak, and maybe it is to some degree, but the point is that the what I call it incentivize activism is we as humans are guided by many forms of incentive. Cash is one form of incentive, right? So I always use this example of like how many people at Woodstock were protesting Vietnam, how many people at Woodstock just wanted to get laid and smoke pot, right? Like so they were interpreted as, oh, there's this groundswell, these people are talking about Vietnam. Well, a lot of these people were really there to get laid and smoke weed, right? How many people at the BLM protest were there to post it on their Instagram, right? Like the Real Housewives of Orange County. I mean, what do they know about institutionalized racism? I mean, give me a break, right? Or let's get in more specific, right? Unions, labor unions are well known for incentivizing activists, right? They basically say, okay, you're expected to turn out to certain events, and if you do, you're gonna advance in the union and get good shifts. And if you don't, even though it's not a requirement of your employment, you're going to somehow get bad shifts and be
Yeah.
disincentivized, right? Same thing in politics, right? If let's just say I'm a staff member for the California Assembly, right? My job is working on legislation for California, but there's a tacit expectation that I go to certain Democratic Party events. And I'm sure, and the Republican Party does the same thing, right? If you're a Republican staffer, so half the people at a lot of these events where, I don't know, say Beto O'Rourke is speaking. It's like, who wants to listen to Beto O'Rourke? It's the party tells you got to go out to listen to Beto, right? So it's like this is what's being done. So are those is getting a bad shift versus a good shift, is retaining your job as a political staffer, is having major social media cred, is getting laid, are those as powerful as cash? And I would argue, yes, they are. So I get crap for paying people cash when that is just one of many forms of incentive.
Yeah. No, and again, you're very articulate. You're doing a good job at defending your position. I guess I would summarize what you've said is this is happening. It's reality. People wake up. This is the way the world works. Having said all that, do you think it's still reasonable for me to say, yeah, okay, that might be the way the world works, but in an ideal society, that it shouldn't work that way. We should somehow promote the idea that people should only go to protests if they're willing to take the sacrifice of taking time off work. Like your union example is beautiful, and I disagree with it. Your promotion example within the political parties, I agree with it, and it shouldn't be happening. But just because these things are happening, that we say, oh, there's something not quite right about that, does that give us reason to do the crowds on demand?
John, why don't we all write a little post-it note whenever we go to a protest, and let's write all of our ulterior motives for being there. Like, and it's mandatory. If you're going to a protest, you have to write every single reason. I'm trying to impress a girl. I hear
Yeah.
there's going to be marijuana at the protest. I want to post it on my social media. I have to write every single reason why I'm here, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, conceptually, what you're saying isn't 100% wrong, but it's the same fallacy as your argument about commoditized friendship, where it's like
Right.
you're living in a fantasy world where people like. I mean, do you have teenage girls? I mean, like, how are those friendships, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if in the Sean world, we all have to be genuine friends. I mean, I think there's teenage girls won't have any friends left. I mean, like, it's kind of an absurd level. You're being very ambitious in what you're seeking, I guess, is what I would say,
Right.
is that because we're never going to be able to have essentially demonstrations where people have no other motives, or there isn't compensation, because even in what you suggest, your world, it's kind of also like suggesting. So in the British Parliament, um previously to the American Revolution, you would not be paid for your service in Parliament,
Hmm.
which means who would be in Parliament? Wealthy landowners. So one of the concepts of the American system was to say, actually, we are going to pay representatives because we want people who are not part of the aristocracy to be able to be represented. So I guess the same point is true for protests. We want people who are not part of the flexible class, is what I would say, the flex class. So it's not necessarily just the wealthy, because of course the wealthy can attend protests if they want, but also the flexible class of workers who have that flexibility to be able to attend, and that it should be open to everybody. So I guess that's sort of the framework that I see. So I don't feel like there's anything untoward. I mean, theoretically, and like, let me just take another example, hit at this kind of like what this the idea of grassroots protest, right? So, like, take an example of like something that you might think is the most grassroots protest of all. Let's just say there's four moms who come together and say, our kids don't have the newest textbooks in the school, and we want to fundraise to make sure they can have the newest textbooks in the school. That sounds great. There are four moms. They come together. They decide to make signs. And they make handmade signs, and then they go to the school board meeting and they rally outside the school board meeting, and then they speak at the school board meeting, and then they come back every Tuesday for the school board meeting until the school board says, okay, we're going to authorize the books. That sounds pretty grassroots, doesn't it, Sean? But it isn't. You know why? I mean, it is and it isn't, because how did those parents? That took a lot of time to write those handmade signs. Took a lot of time to get together to call your friends. I'm wagering that none of those four moms worked at McDonald's. I'm
Right.
wagering. I'm wagering that they're all stay-at-home moms with a dad who works, or they're moms who have a flexible job, probably high income, that permits them to do that, right?
Yeah.
So what you just witnessed was paid advocacy, but it just was paid indirectly.
Yeah, no, the opportunity cost argument is solid. I don't think I can argue against that. It's more the moral issue of whether this should or should not be happening. And actually, it reminds me of some of the conversations. So my background's medicine, and originally, the Hippocratic Oath, you weren't supposed to take any payment for your services,
Right.
and
Right.
then now we do get payment, and then there's an argument. Well, should you just be on salary because that's a more pure way to do it? Then you won't
Right, because
rush.
you don't have an incentive to get to
Right,
constantly bill more services.
right, right.
Well, I mean, well, one thing I've always studied actually in politics, Sean, that I found is very interesting, and I wrote I think a senior paper on it, is the politics of incentives, right? So
Right.
so if you go to England, right, their leaders are very nerdy and very articulate, right? Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but they're also very odd, like personally very odd. Like they could never speak to like normal people.
Right.
Because the structure is in order to become prime minister of England, you have of the UK rather, you have to be very good at debating in a fancy way in a silly suit in Parliament and referring to you as my good honorable member from North Kensingshire. You have to be kind of silly, right? But whereas American politicians, they have this sort of fake populist kind of shtick, right? We have systems that incentivize different things, right? So in your example about medicine, right, if you're a doctor who's paid per procedure, you have an incentive, even if you're a good dude, to bill by procedure and bill more
Yeah.
procedures. But if you bill by salary, you might have an incentive to be lazy and
Oh
to
yeah.
do less even when maybe a procedure is warranted, right? So there is part of the beauty why I'm actually such a fan of our great founding fathers in this country is they designed the system based on incentives. So many countries' constitutions were based on people doing the right thing. Our system is actually based on politicians doing the wrong thing. It's the speaker is going to be power hungry. The courts are going to be power hungry. The president is going to want to be a tyrant. Put them all against each other.
So
Because
so so using your argument, should we be allowed to pay people to vote? So I'm going to pay you, Adam, to vote for the guy I want to win.
I mean, I think that's a very fishy argument. I don't necessarily think that pertains directly to what we do. But I don't agree with that. To be clear,
But why not?
well, because I think that your vote is specifically yours, and it's your. I think now. Here's kind of the interesting thing.
I
Should
got you. I got you, Adam. I got
not
you.
completely, because I actually minimally agree with you.
Okay.
Be able to be compensated to go to the polling place?
Right.
Yes. Should you be able to be compensated for whom to vote for? No. So, for example, and by the way, there are groups that they don't compensate you, but they're like, hey, we have pizza, we'll get you an Uber, but those groups don't tell you who to vote for. I mean, now those groups know who you're going to vote for with their algorithms, right? So they're looking in an area of LA that's 90% Democrat and they'll turn you out, or they're looking in an area that's 90% Republican and they'll turn you out. They can't tell you to vote Democrat or vote Republican, but they have a pretty good idea who you're going to vote for.
So the logic goes this way. My libertarian friends say this to me, Sean. We should be able to sell our votes because most people don't know anything about politics, anyways. It should be legitimate to be able to sell your vote for a certain dollar value or to the highest bidder, and then allow power voting. So why shouldn't we allow people to just sell their votes? I'll sell it to you for $1,000.
Right. I mean, it's a very interesting thing. I mean, and by the way, we're not that far from that system at the moment. If you think about the swing states, right? Like, if you actually look at the margin of victory in the swing states in these presidential elections, right? Each vote is actually worth each independent vote. If you say like, okay, 30% or like 60% of the people are decided, or maybe 70%. So you say the 30% who's undecided, those votes are worth tens of thousands of dollars each. So, I mean, it is kind of funny because if you're Joe Manchin in the Senate, well, he's not in the Senate anymore, but like if you're like the swing voter in the Senate, you kind of do sell your vote, right? You say, hey, you better give me $1 billion for West Virginia or else, right? Or
But at least they don't make it too obvious, though, wouldn't you say? They kind of sell versus
people like Joe
officially.
Manchin make it pretty very obvious that he's selling. Then, well, because for him, or there's another gentleman, Baucus in Montana, who also, with the Obamacare, extracted huge concessions out of
Yeah.
Obama during that vote because his vote was so critical. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys then go back to their constituents and are like, look, I got you guys a freaking great deal. I mean, they went to, I mean, especially it works in a place like Montana with like 10 people because it's like, hey, if you get $1 billion for Montana, it's that actually is like a lot of money on a per person basis. So like there's, I mean, I know John Tester, who's the senator from Montana, lost, but a lot of these guys can remain in power because they actually bring so much pork home to their states. You
Yeah.
know, so I guess my point is, again, not to be quarrelsome with you, Sean, but like in many cases, votes are already for sale.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
No,
know,
no, your point about us being hypocritical by saying, "Oh, Adam, you shouldn't do what you're doing," and yet you've given many, many examples of basically the same thing happening, like with the unions saying, "Here, you go out and you come to this protest, or we give you a day off," and there's all sorts of economic incentives all around. And your other strong point, I think, is giving the opportunity to amplify a voice that or an idea that would be almost impossible to amplify unless there was some sort of market mechanism attached to it. And so you are making strong points there. But I still disagree with you that
but I
this
think
is
a lot of why you disagree, Sean, is there's this sort of like id in you that's like there's
yeah,
something wrong about it
yeah,
because for some reason you're able to justify, not justify, but you kind of like, okay, well, there's money in politics broadly. There's this sort of, okay, but because what we do is such a distillation of that, it's kind of like there's people have this stumbling block around it. And that's part of why I like to go on these shows is to basically like really unpack what is people's problem with it on a like to drill into it. And it all comes down to there's something I don't like. Or in some cases they're like, actually, you're kind of right, Adam. Like
yeah. Well, you're right in that you are calling out my hypocrisy. So if I have a problem with you, then I should have a lot bigger problem with all the other examples you've listed.
correct.
And it's pretty self-righteous of me to say, "Oh, it's terrible, paid protesters." Well, why don't I put the same energy into the other examples that you list?
And
So
I
I think,
do think there's a value, but I think the ultimate thing is that people need to understand that protests are a way of attention getting, but protests are not reflective of how the majority thinks.
hmm,
So that is not necessarily, they could be, but not necessarily. They're reflective of the people who turn out. So the core thing about that is that this is what it goes back to what I said at the start about Jeb Bush and the Tea Party, right? As the two examples is ultimately what people should the reason why you use the analogy of voting is because there's this idea that some people have that protest is sort of this sort of plebiscite. It represents, okay, if this many people are in the street, then that's reflective of how the country thinks or how the region thinks. Whereas in actuality, it's only reflective of how those people think, right? And they may or may not represent the majority view. So, I mean, Richard Nixon, famously referred to the silent majority, right? Which was a great and correct statement because they basically in the late 60s, the country was barraged by these large scale protests, right? And from the left wing people, right? And Richard Nixon ran for president. It's like, yeah, they're out there, but they don't represent the silent majority. The silent majority of people don't agree with those people. And he was elected overwhelmingly, right? So, and actually, let me give you a couple other examples of that. Are you familiar with these people in the Congress called the Squad? You know, the far
yeah,
left
yeah, yeah,
Squad. Right. So there's this lady, Cori Bush. She's kind of one of those wackadoodles, right? But she So she actually lost a Democratic primary in St. Louis, right? She she has, like, I don't know, million, 2 million, 5 million followers on social media. Her opponent had like 5,000. Same with this other guy who lost, Jamal Bowman in New York, also kind of one of those far left people. He lost. He had millions of followers on social media. He lost to somebody with only a few thousand followers. So that's very reflective, because the social media is kind of like the protest. It reflects how certain people think, but it doesn't reflect the broad swath of the people, right? So I think I love protests and I think they're effective, but I think when people view them as a plebiscite, they're wrong. When they view them as, let's pay attention to this, they're right. So
Right.
what I like to say, one of my former clients, I can't even take credit for it myself, called me and said, what you really are is the town crier. You know what I mean? You, like what they used to have in is like, you spread the word, right? Ultimately, if what the message that we're spreading doesn't resonate, it doesn't resonate. So instead of thinking of them as a plebiscite, you have to think of them as like an advertisement.
Right. So we've talked about the concept itself, and you've done a great job at defending the concept. You say that you don't cross. One of the lines you have for you yourself as a business is you don't want to support violence and burning cars like the LA riots we're seeing right now and stuff. Do you have any other limits? And I'll give you a practical example. Right now in Canada, all our major cities, we have pro-Palestine protests. And in fact, just last week, we had one blocking the streets in downtown Toronto. An ambulance had to turn around. The police said, no, you have to turn around. You can't come through this protest, which that drives me nuts. I mean, if that's happening, I'm totally, their
Unacceptable.
issue.
That is an illegal form of protest, though. That is an illegal protest. So we would not
Right.
associate ourselves with that. I mean, I assume in Canada it's illegal to block
Yeah,
off a road without a permit. So when I say we don't associate ourselves with illegal activity, I mean all forms of illegal protest. So
right,
blocking emergency vehicles or law enforcement vehicles. I mean, even like when we're talking about the anti-ICE demonstrations
right,
in Los Angeles, I think there's an argument that this is civil disobedience, that this is civil rights era civil disobedience against a repressive regime of the ICE. I mean, I'm not even going to take a position on that, but regardless, the civil rights demonstrators went to jail. So at the end of the day, history vindicated them,
right,
but they were breaking the law. History
right,
vindicated them, but they were breaking the law. So I think that if it's illegal to block law enforcement vehicles, it is both illegal and unethical to block emergency vehicles.
right,
You
right.
know, and so I would agree that not only should those protesters in Canada be punished, they're also simply doing something that is horribly unethical.
So let me push you a bit. I won't ask for your personal opinion on particular issues, but
Sure.
you're providing a service to the public. You're a company. You're like the baker in the Midwest, right? You bake cakes, then you have to bake a cake for me. Now, I think I've heard you say that there have been some issues that you've said, no, we're not going to do a crowd for you. We're not going to help you with that campaign.
Absolutely.
Should you be sued and forced to do a campaign for some things that you don't agree with?
Well, so here's where I'm like, so I'm a little bit like the baker. Ironically, I can't bake to save my life. I make really good salads, but I don't really like oven. But the I'm a little bit like the baker, because you're right. I can kind of I'm making a custom product, right? So when we do a protest, every protest is a custom product. It's not a Starbucks product, although I guess the Starbucks product is sort of customized, but basically it's not a commodity product. I agree. However, there's one difference between the baker. Every cake, within some reason, is similarly difficult to make. Whereas there are certain protest causes that might come with certain additional risks. So there's the ideological component, but there's also the risk component, right? So I have to factor in, am I going to wade into something that is going to get us sued? Am I going to wade into something that might lead to an incident that could be problematic, right? So where I'm different from the baker is that I also have to consider risk in who I take on. So, which is a purely practical and not moral consideration, but risk overlaps with morality because, for example, I wouldn't take on like let's just say the Ku Klux Klan wanted to hire us, right? I wouldn't take that on because I morally disagree with them, but I also on a even if I had no moral qualms with taking them on merely on a risk basis, it wouldn't make sense.
Right. That's what I was wanting you to say. I wanted you to say that, no, Sean, I do have some morals, and there are some things that I wouldn't support. I'm not just a gun for hire for whoever will hire me.
I mean, just full transparency. The causes I like to take on are generally kind of common sense causes where there's some whack job lefty or some whack job right wing policy that needs to be reined in, where the silent majority of people think it's nuts, but you have some mouth breathing nut jobs who are pushing it, where we need a counterforce. Those are my favorite advocacy ones to take on. So where it's the silent majority either on the right or on the left.
Right. Now, the last question, and then I'll ask you for your final thoughts. But my last question for you is, is this more a feature of the Democrats that hire paid protesters, or is it more a feature of the Republicans? You mentioned the Tea Party as your lead example, but certainly in a lot of the media that you read, at least from my vantage point in Canada, it seems like, oh, it's those radical leftists that are always burning things and protesting. So what are your thoughts on that, left versus right?
Well, I mean, I can't speak again to the violent part of things because that's not really our business, or it isn't our business at all. But however, in regards to the peaceful side of things, I can say we have clients on both sides. Like I said, we try to emphasize common sense kind of ones where I feel like number one, because again, it's like the baker, I'm most effective. So obviously we don't like to do anything that's risky, but number two, we like to do things where it's effective, right? So it's most effective when we can do something that's common sense. And I'm really proud to have worked with people on the left and the right, of course, not on the same issue. And for example, in some cases we'll work for management and in some cases we'll work for labor, right? When one side is right or the other side is right. But never on the same side. And we never we kind of hold ourselves for the most part to an attorney-client privilege, conflicts of interest rules, even though we're not legally obliged to in any way. But it's a good business practice. I mean, we want to stay in business another 13 years, so that requires a certain level of ethics and etc. So yeah, I mean, I would say it's a feature of both parties. But I think conservatives, I understand why conservatives feel one way, but I actually think we've worked a lot with conservatives and welcome the opportunity to, because in many cases, conservatives have more trouble turning people out to demonstrate because, as I was saying, conservatives are more likely to have less flexible work schedules and are more likely to have kids, right? So both of those things make it harder, and conservatives have less of a culture of protest. So all of those factors make it critical for conservatives to turn people out but harder for them to do it, right? So again, we turn out people for both sides, but I think we tend to turn people out most for silent majority type things where one group is dominating the discourse because they're really loud and we're backed by the people who might have money but don't want to turn out.
Right. No, brilliant. So Adam, you've given me a ton to think about. It. I have kids. They're actually, well, they're in their 20s now. They're done university. At least, well, two of them are still in university. But I'm still going to tell them that if someone offers to pay you to be a protester, still going to say, guys, you shouldn't be doing that.
Only if you agree with the cause. I say if you agree with the cause, do it. If you disagree with the cause, don't do it. You know what I mean? And that's, again, as I would say, is there any person on the MAGA side that would attend a BLM rally for a few $100s? I don't think they would.
That's a good point.
Firstly, I don't think most of the BLM people would go to a Trump rally for a few $100s.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So you're in Canada. Where in Canada? I totally missed
I
that.
just north of Toronto. I'm just north of
Oh,
Toronto.
very nice. Very
Yeah,
nice. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, you guys just had that big election for Pierre.
Exactly.
That's kind of embarrassing, honestly. I mean, he had such potential, and then he kind of, I don't know. I mean, it was a tough election for him.
Oh yeah.
I'd be kind of embarrassed if I lost my seat and then someone else like gave up their seat just so I could return. I mean, that would. Speaking of things that would kind of fill me with a little bit of like awkwardness. I mean,
Yeah.
that is awkward. I feel like he's got to win his seat on his own right. Like, don't
Yeah.
just go to rural Alberta and make one of those guys like leave their seats just so you can come back. I mean, I think
Right.
he's a good talker, but I think he has the same flaws Ron DeSantis or
Mhm.
there are a lot of other people like that in American politics. There was this guy, Scott Walker, who was the governor of Wisconsin, also kind of very kind of intellectual, conservative, good talker, but a little smarmy. And like people don't like that kind of smarmy thing, and Pierre is very smarmy guy. He's also kind of like, oh, I hate the government, but I've been in government all my life. Like that also kind of it's like Ted Cruz too. It's like, yeah, very like, yeah, Ted Cruz is another kind of example. It reminds me of Pierre Poilievre. It's like, he's been in government all his life, but he's railing against government. It's like, well, why don't you get a job outside of government first?
Right. Right.
And conversely, I think Carney had this whole thing where it's like, I'm for government, but I've been out of government all my life, but I'm also incredibly wealthy. I assume he's incredibly wealthy. I mean,
Yeah. Well, just to push back a tiny bit, the difference with government versus so I was in medical politics for years, and if you're on the board of an association, and there comes a point where you can't keep criticizing it because you're there, and so you just have to leave. But it's different with our form of parliament. If you're in the official opposition, the role is to oppose, but he hasn't been steering the car. So I'd push back a tiny bit. Anyway, any final comments, Adam? You're very convincing. I'm not saying you've convinced me, and you're very articulate and smart and brave. But any final comments on this issue of paid protesting in your company?
well, I think like anything in philosophy and ethics, you have to drill down to the basics as to like drill down into the weeds. Like and why I really appreciated this conversation is I think as we kind of explored a lot of the weeds of what is it like so much of things that we don't like, whether it's adultery or whatever. It's like or this. It's like we just reflexively don't like it, but we don't always drill into this is why we don't like it. So if after drilling into it you say, hey, what you're kind of saying is I don't love the idea that money buys influence in politics,
Right.
and I think that that's a reasonable position. But I think that you have to set your only option is to say a pox on all your houses and I
Yeah.
condemn them all equally. So maybe
Yeah.
I don't like that people are being paid to demonstrate, but I also don't like that they're political ads. And I also don't like that you need to have money to run for office. And I also don't like that people use protesting as an opportunity to flex on social media. And I also don't like that unions use it. And I kind of say a pox on all your houses.
Yeah.
And I would like to broadly move toward a system that has reduced influence of money on politics.
Yeah.
I 100% agree that we should reduce money in politics. And I guess the one thing I would say is I'm happy to organize protesters around that.
That's brilliant. No, you've been very good at calling out my hypocrisy, and you've given me a lot to think about. Adam, it's been a real pleasure. Those of you watching, if you've gotten this far, please subscribe, share this content. Check out Adam's website. He's also quoted in the media quite a bit in the States. And Adam, thank you so much for actually your PR person actually asked to come on for this conversation. So thanks to Kristen and yourself for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Appreciate it, Sean.
Great.